Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 276 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which today is dedicated to hiring people remotely. And for that, I have returning guest Mark Kilby, who is a remote work and distributed agile guide. And we're going to talk about how to look for people who will thrive in a remote environment, how to design the hiring and interview process, and we also get into the fact that there are lots of different ways of doing remote. And also near the end, Mark begins to talk about the onboarding process. And that was brilliant because it can get us thinking about the whole onboarding or integration process, as Mark calls it. So that for next episode, we are all ready to listen to Nadia Vatalidis, who is the director of people at the company Remote. And when I talked to her, we talked precisely about the whole onboarding process. So I'm delighted to have you here with me. My name is Pilar Orti. I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, the company behind the show. And of course, you can find out everything we're doing over at virtualnotdistant.com. Now, some things to say about today's conversation. Well, it was recorded back in March 2021, and I'm recording this now in late June. So we actually recorded also back in March a section that I included in another episode, which was 267, which was on mindset changes for the new remote manager. So you might also want to check that one out. But listening back to the segment today, which as I said is on hiring, it struck me how important it is, like with all the team practices we transfer online, not to try and replicate the recruitment process, but adapt it to the online space. And also look for opportunities where we are at an advantage because we're interviewing online because our process is remote. So again, this goes with everything that we say about adopting online practices and working as a remote team or with remote team members. Yes, we always try and see, okay, how did we used to do it before, or how is it traditionally done? So how would that be online? But actually, it's a new medium, it's a new context, and we've got the opportunity to make things better, to improve things. So I think that I encourage you to listen with that in mind. And one example of these, which I think is quite present during our chat, is, for example, turning a team job interview into a learning opportunity for the team. So this is another thing. I'm going to go off script for a second, but I am seeing a lot of how do we continue learning in online organizations when we have remote team members. And a lot of that conversation goes to how do we transfer traditional learning settings online. So how do we run an online workshop? However, being in an online space gives us different ways of being able to learn together. And again, the online space will be great for some things and not so great for others. So where are the opportunities for more informal learning in the online space, or shorter bursts of sharing what we're learning so that everyone benefits from it? And I think that, for example, as we're designing the hiring process in a remote team, one of the outcomes of this could be about how can we best learn together during this process. And if you think about how clear you need to be about what this person needs to bring to the team, how clear you need to be about how your team operates if you're bringing someone in, and then how clear you want to be into what is a good, call it team fit or team complement. All of that is a great opportunity to talk about all this with the team and to learn about your own process. And when we're doing this online, we might actually have more opportunities to learn from this, either by recording some interviews and then making sure that everyone can have a look, or by, if you don't want to do that or if that's not appropriate, then by having short meetings after each candidate, for example, or sharing asynchronously our thoughts. There's a lot of potential. So I was delighted, of course, that Mark, who is all about coaching teams and self-organization, agile with a capital A, he does approach anyway the whole hiring process from that angle, from how can the team be best involved? And we do talk a little bit about learning. So let's go straight into it. I'm delighted to share the wonderful Mark Kilby with you for about something like the fifth time on this show. Enjoy. So, Mark, you have a course as part of the Lucid Meetings school, how to discover, interview, and hire amazing remote people with Johanna, of course.
Yes, with so many businesses moving online involuntarily, they realized, okay, we still need to find people, we still need to hire, and many had already discovered, what we did in the office may not work for the hiring process. How do we interview online? How do we do this? So we cover everything from looking at what are the criteria you're looking for? How do you structure the interview team? And our recommendation is make sure you include the team that the new person's going to be working with as part of the interview team. So don't just have the manager and HR do the recruiting. Have the entire team. This has been my experience. You get much better recruiting, much better what some would say onboarding, we call integration. Mm-hmm. So how do you integrate the people more easily into the team? So if they've already met the team through the interviews, it gets much easier.
Great. So we'll put a link in the show notes to the course, of course.
Yes.
So let's start with, because the title is How to Discover, Interview, and Hire Amazing Remote People. So who are these remote people, Mark?
Who are these remote people? Well, it's everybody now. So.
That's true.
Yeah. That's also one of the advantages of working remote is I don't have to worry about finding people in my city. I can now expand my search much more broadly. I don't have to worry about relocation costs. I don't have to worry about getting them a desk, hopefully. But the idea is you should provide some resources to these new employees. But if you can broaden your mindset to say, I really could literally hire the best from anywhere, then you have many places you could search. Now, as they say, there are some devils in the details. So you do want to be aware based on what country you're in, what region. So I know here in the United States, it's fairly easy to hire anywhere in the US. If you're hiring from Canada, usually not as much of an issue. But if you're hiring in other countries, same thing. In Europe, you're fine to, I think, hire still anybody across Europe except the UK now because of Brexit.
Anyone in the European Union.
Anyone in the European Union.
Sorry.
So you just want to be aware of some of the legal issues. So you do want to work with an HR person or somebody who's aware of what are the laws. And there's actually some firms now that work with this international hiring trend that can help you with that.
Yeah, our friends of Shield Geo are one of them.
Yep. But if you got that mindset, I can now hire from anywhere. You start looking at, okay, who do I need to hire and where might I find them online? In my area of expertise is mostly in IT. So there's certain places where developers and system administrators and people in the IT space, there's certain places you can find them. And that's where you go online. And you can just post the jobs. And I know some recruiting firms that'll just drop job descriptions in Slack or whatever. That does not always work so well. If you can get into the community and develop some of the connections in the community so that people get to know you and get to know your company, just like as if you were going to go speak at certain places, to do a talk, and people get to know, oh, this is the kind of work you do. This is interesting. I want to know more. And then you can talk about the job opportunities as well. So it's that same idea of talking about the company in a way that's useful and interesting to others, but you're doing this in an online forum. And you and I are familiar with that, but not everybody is. And so we talk a little bit about that in the course. How do you go out and reach these different groups? And then once you've reached these folks and get them into your interview process, how do you then construct the rest of the process to make it easy for them and the interview team?
Mm. And also, I just want to remind people that the you can hire from anywhere. It doesn't have to be global. The
Yes,
whole for me, the beauty of being able to hire remotely is that you can hire from different kinds of places in your country rather than just the ones who are prepared to do the long commute or
right,
the ones
right.
who don't mind or the ones who like to be on trains all day long. Yeah, well, there's also LinkedIn has become really popular.
It has been more popular. I was tracking for a while. They had some remote settings on jobs, but I haven't dug into the details of where they are with that right now. I find it's better if you're out there and you're looking for candidates and you're posting jobs, you make it very clear in the actual job description it is a remote position. And I would be even more clear to say whether it's full-time remote or until pandemic over remote, because I've had a few recruiters reach out to me because of my qualifications, and they'll say, are you looking for a remote position? And my first question will be, are we talking until the end of the pandemic, or is this forever remote? And that's usually when you'll find out, oh no, it's only until things are back to normal and we can move in the office. And oh no, I do not want to move to another country to do that. Thank you.
I think that clarity is really important because you'll get different kinds of people, and also it's about managing expectations and
Yeah,
do that before they come to the interview and ask you. Because
yeah. Yeah,
and
because you don't want to waste their time, and you don't waste your team's time either.
yeah, yeah. So there's all of that. There's making clear also, I suppose, and this comes from the advocacy space, whether remote you're expecting them to work from home, or if you're going to pay for a co-working space once people can leave their homes,
Right.
whether they're okay, whether you're going to be okay if they work from a library and all of that stuff.
If you give some sort of allowance for equipment or
Yes,
furnishing for home office, yeah,
all of
that kind of
that.
thing.
And also, I mean, the law has changed a lot in Europe around all of that. So just understanding
Yeah,
where the law and the insurance laws and all of that are. But I think really, I mean, for me as an advocacy of please remote does not always mean working from home once we're out of the pandemic is
right.
really important because some people might be thinking, well, I don't want to work from home, but I'm really far away from headquarters. However, if the ad or whatever you're seeing says we'll also consider co-working spaces, you might just Google co-working spaces near postcode,
Mhm.
and then hey, there's a oh okay, well I'll apply now. Once we've identified the places, which will some of them will be online, but also something I think all the traditional ways of advertising jobs that you did before, just making it clear, like in big letters, I think, if
Yeah,
you're in
yeah.
traditional medium, what and also what you mean by remote, and like Mark, like you were saying, what does that mean? Does it mean that you work away from headquarters a few days a week or full time?
Exactly.
Once you know where to look for people, how is the selection process different, or is it from when you're getting someone who's going to come into the building?
The first thing you need to be aware of is how well do the candidates' time zones overlap with the interview team, because if the interview team is part of the actual team they'll be working with, that's a good indication right there. Are they going to work out well? If they're 12 hours removed, okay, that might be a bit of a challenge.
So shouldn't that be part of the looking for people though?
Yes, and sometimes
And
you have people in the process of moving, because I've had that
yes.
happen as well. Yeah, so I've had people that I've interviewed that have been in Eastern Europe, and I'm interviewing for positions on the West Coast of the U.S., which is kind of a rough spacing of hours. But then they say, oh, but I'm actually moving to this country in South America, or I'm planning to move to the States, and then you might talk about that a little bit. Well, when is that transition, and how are you doing that? So you might get candidates like that. So just being aware of that, and with your interview team, it's really setting them up for looking at what are those hours of overlap, and also what kind of things do we feel is important, not only from a skill set, which any interview team is going to look at, but also how the person works remotely. At this point in time, everybody has now worked remotely. The question is, have they been able to do it well? And you and I have had many conversations on that. Do they have a space, whether it's a co-working space or space at home or elsewhere, where they are focused, where they have the right computer equipment, that they're ergonomically set up properly so they're not dealing with any back strain or anything else? How do they how do they manage time away from the screen? Because that's equally important. You going from video call to video call without taking breaks, we now know is psychologically stressful. We know that now. It's not just anecdotal. So having some questions around how do you manage your remote workspace in your remote day is equally as important as to how they arrange their skills. So one of the things we spend a lot of time in the online course is on how do you ask those behavioral types of questions. So one might be something like, when some of your past remote teams have had communication issues, how have you handled those? So it's a very open question, and you might find out they tried a couple different things. It may not be what your team's tried, but that's okay. It's more, how did they approach the challenge? Do they wait for somebody else to solve their problem, or are they proactive? So that's one of the things you're looking for in those behavioral driven kinds of questions. And so you're prepping your interview team as part of that. Once you have those questions set, and you've got a good set of hours of overlap so the interview team can meet with a candidate, you might want to do some initial screening first. So it could be one person on the team talks first to all the candidates and decides, yes, they definitely meet all our criteria. It's typically a manager, but it may be somebody on the team that takes that role. It might be like a senior person on the team. They might do the initial vetting so the whole team does not go through every candidate. Then from that point on, you have the one-to-one meetings with the candidate and each team member, and then have time for the team to decide on which candidate fit the best. So that's it in a nutshell. There's other stages in there, but essentially, who and how does the team do some initial filtering of the candidates, and once they get through that filtering, how do you get the candidate connected with each of the team members, and who's going to ask which questions around skills and remote work environment and remote work habits, and then how does the team come back together to decide who's our best fit?
And is there anything that we do before that asynchronously? So any questions or I don't know, any questions that can be answered in the written form or recorded, or actually do we just go straight into the selection and then the interview?
It depends on the process. So, for instance, I know there are some new startups that are focusing on completely asynchronous recruiting, and there a lot of it is capturing video, which I'm still not sure how well that works, because I like to see reactions to questions, and it's hard to capture that with asynchronous video. But there are some asynchronous things you can do. Um, on the developer side, some people like to give skill tests on, do they know this programming language, or how would you solve this particular kind of problem. In my experience, those don't work so well. It's more how do they solve problems? And I think for any kind of knowledge worker position, you want to try to do some of that synchronously, but you can have them respond to some of that asynchronously as well. Most of the asynchronous work I found is getting the resumes in, having that interview team screen the initial resumes to see how well they fit the criteria they set up around skills and remote skill sets as well, and not just job related skills. And the team can do a lot of that asynchronously. But when it comes to actually meeting with the candidates, I still like meeting with them and seeing how do they react to the questions, how do they react to particular team members, and that's really hard to do asynchronously. Again, it's that building relationships. How do you build these relationships?
So I'm thinking something that didn't I didn't think of before the pandemic, because the experience of remote work has been so diverse.
Hmm.
And for some people, remote work has been we catch up in the morning, we have another meeting in the afternoon, blah, blah, and we don't
Yeah.
use collaboration platforms. We're still doing email and video. I
Hmm.
think that before, as part of selection, and even apart from just putting the word out there for a job, it's really important to audit how we work
Yeah.
and the rhythm of the team communication and the balance of sync, async, written, real time. And I'm wondering whether, if, for example, the team is very async, because maybe your team is somewhere where actually maybe you have the one-to-ones once a week, one
Hmm.
group meeting a week, and that's it, and everything else is done async. Then to have something asynchronous that's quite meaty before the interview, not to test the person, but to see how they react to that, as in to see how was that for you,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that before that wasn't as important, because most of definitely the fully distributed roles, you just expected that.
Yeah.
However, now, and now for some people it's video calls all day. That's remote for them.
Yeah. 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 But you have a good point there, because especially for those companies that have been remote longer, it's also looking at what are your written skills look like? How clearly do you communicate in a written form? That's a key skill for remote. And if you can't express yourself clearly in not just email, but any kind of written form, maybe it's on in some kind of online repository, maybe you're using something like Notion or even Confluence or anything where you're kind of capturing ideas or documenting something. Are you expressing that clearly? Can people understand? Um, there could be asynchronous portion to that. What I'm not sure about the European Union laws, but here in the US, you've got to be very careful that you don't have them do too much, because then you're really asking them to do contracted work.
Oh yeah, no,
So
no, no, no.
yeah, so
Yeah,
you got to be
yeah,
careful of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm not asking for too much. It's an exercise. It's something that
Yeah,
is it's
yeah,
part of the selection process. So yeah, so I think that really important, because there will be some teams which barely. I mean, I know lots of teams that are not doing any much written communication, because because they're resisting the online space, in my view, but actually
yeah,
just because the culture of the organization or even of the country is like that. So again, what you don't want, if that is your team, to have someone like me who loves to do all the communication in writing and then find that actually nobody's reading what I'm writing. It's become really complicated, Mark.
yeah.
Anyway, let's move to the interview, which it's real time, so we all know what real time conversation is. What is now this? But this is very different for some people. So how is the interview process different, or how is it set up?
Yeah. So um, there. So back in the old days, put it that way. It used to be you dress very nice for an interview, and that was important. For remote, if you're doing a live video interview, it's yes, you can be business casual. You can have a nice shirt or blouse on. hopefully you're wearing pants. I know I realize that's an issue these days for remote. But more importantly, are you well lit? Can people see your facial expressions? Are you used to communicating that way? Do you have good audio? So as we were setting up for this call, for instance, we realized my headset was not picking up. It was the microphone on my laptop. So we switched that. So does the candidate realize that's important because you get a clearer call? It's easier to understand each other when you have clear audio. So does the candidate handle themselves well in the actual real-time online communication? So that's a key skill to demonstrate in the interview, as well as answering the questions and just answering those openly and honestly.
And anything else that is different apart from the interaction with the tech, or actually is that it?
That really can be it.
Yeah.
It depends. It depends on if you're doing some of the skill testing live.
Mm.
So in the course, we talk about the option of auditions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were, let's say you were interviewing for a product manager role, so maybe you do 10 minutes of a mock meeting, a pretend meeting, where you're going through some requirements with a few people, and you have a couple other team members on the call in that case, and you're asking them to facilitate the discussion as if they were the product manager. So like 10 minutes, and just to see what they do. How do they handle questions? Because that's part of the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than talk about it, let's just see how it goes. And that's where you got to be careful that it is a mock situation, uh,
Yeah.
not actual product work, because then you're asking for free contracting work. But sometimes those auditions can be just as useful, and it's important to have feedback time for the candidate as well. Not only feedback for them, but feedback for how did that work for you? This is kind of how we operate. Are you comfortable with that format? Was there anything that seemed unusual for you? And as part of that, whether you do an audition or not, I always coach every team member on the team, talk about the organization, talk about what it's like to work in this remote team, in this remote organization. What does your day look like? Because your day might be different from the next person they talk to. So let them compare notes. And from that, one of the things that I work with the interview teams on is, okay, so as each person has discussed our remote work environment, what did you notice about the questions they asked? Did they ask the same questions? Did they start digging deeper, which might indicate more interest? Did they not ask anything, which might indicate, all right, they may not really resonate, they may not really connect well with how we work remotely. Because as you said, there's many different ways to do this now.
And I'm making me think, do we want to make even more of a providing a space later for further questions? What I'm thinking of is, especially me, because I always come up with my questions once I'm home. Oh,
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
because the questions that come up in the moment, not the ones that you take in prepared. I can see it could be even more important because if you're going into a building for an interview, depending on what the process is like, but sometimes you have someone who takes you to the meeting room, who then walks you
Mhm.
out, and after the interview, there's that element of, oh, I should have asked, and there's someone that you can kind of ask something,
Yeah.
but if you're remote, you leave that meeting and that's it.
Mhm.
So what can you do, or what do people do to provide the space for that? It's not about questions a few days later, but about that space that has disappeared because of the distance.
As part of that, it might be the initial screener, who they met first online, might be the same person that kind of touches base with them, just stays in contact with them during the interview process. It could be an HR person that stays in contact with them, but usually there's somebody that's staying in contact with the candidate throughout the process. So as they move from person to person, then the candidate might say, "Oh, I had a question about this,"
Mm.
and who maintains that continuity can say, you know what, why don't you ask that in the next interview, or if it's the last interview, you can say, let me get back with the team and see if I can get an answer for you. So,
Yeah, I think that's something really important that that we might not think of if we've come straight from the physical space.
mhm.
Those be more deliberate about creating those touch points as well. There was
Yeah.
something else that came to mind, but I can't remember now.
Well, then you're going to have to ask me later, won't
Yeah, yes,
you?
exactly. There you go. There you go. Um, right. Well, I think it was about something around feedback and the meetings. And yeah, I see this also as an opportunity. I mean, this would be the same in the physical space, in the co-located space. But I think because of the online space where it's just easier to find time together, let's face it, because there's no travel involved. It's also a great opportunity to nurture in your team some great listening skills. I was thinking while
Mhm,
you were talking
mhm.
about the feedback and listen to the questions they ask and how they engage and all of that. So I've always seen team hiring processes as a great opportunity for bonding of the team, actually,
Yes.
and for having
Yes.
great conversations around what's important to us.
Yeah. And even how you might improve the hiring process.
Hmm.
Usually, and we talk about this in the course too, it may not be after every candidate, but it might be after a group of candidates. Somebody on the interview team might have noticed something. Oh, this one question didn't seem to hit with any of the candidates. Can we spend a few minutes talking about that? And can we come up with something different and have the team reflect right there and then? Or if they're meeting, discuss a few candidates, can they also spend a little time reflecting on, hey, this time the interviews went very well. What was special about that? So we make sure that the next time we're hiring a candidate, we know what we need to do to repeat that. So having the team also reflect on their hiring process, but again, learning together as a team that can be a really good bonding process for them.
Great. So then, any thoughts then on the interview process? And then, well, sorry, we've done the interview process, but any thoughts on the first steps to onboarding or integration? And then we'll refer the listeners back to episode 219. But what might the first steps be, considering that this is an online onboarding process?
So making it clear what the steps are. And sometimes it can be very simple as setting up a board in Trello. And I've seen this done a few different ways where maybe each column represents here's what you want to do on your first day, your first week, by the first month, or here's some important categories of information. So is there any organizational paperwork you need to get done right away, like around benefits, for instance, or how do you learn who's got key knowledge in certain areas? So you might have columns organized that way. However you do it, the team that the person is moving into should build that together, and they might rotate who guides the new candidate through that process. So it could be one person that does it for a couple of candidates, and then they rotate. But when they rotate with another team member, they should talk about what worked and what didn't. Or if it's with a manager, talk about what worked and what didn't, and how do we change that board for that onboarding or that integration process. And the other thing that I tell candidates is this is really just an idea of what will work. It's really up to you to add things. So if you discover things that we've missed, put it on the board, and we're going to have somebody check in with you on a regular basis so that we see that you're progressing, but also what have you discovered that we might need to do for the next person we bring on. Those are key steps that I like to take for the onboarding or integration process.
I love that the person is not waiting 6 months down the line to say what could have made the process
Yeah,
better,
yeah, no,
but
right
actually,
away,
as
right
you're there,
away.
what's missing? What do I need to know that
Yeah.
I can't find? I've also had another idea, Mark. I don't know if you've heard of anyone doing this because I haven't. If it's practical, why doesn't the team do like a 3-minute video where they all get on a call, switch the videos on, and say to this person, hey, congratulations, right? If you need something about this, talk to me. If you need something about this, talk to me. Have you heard anyone do something like that?
Not that. Although I like that idea. Usually, what I will do is even the first day, get them in some sort of team meeting. So if the team does something like a daily stand up, I bring them in the daily stand up. If there's a planning meeting, I bring them into the planning meeting just to get to meet people. They do a quick introduction of themselves and maybe some interesting things about their skills, but also go around the room so that the team can say, well, here's things you can come to me for. Here's how you find me, or and basically doing that live. But doing it as a video, sure, especially if it's a more asynchronous team, why not?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, yeah, if it, and even if it isn't, I'm thinking if we're looking, and especially now, maybe later when things calm down and we've got a little bit more control over our schedules. But if you think about how nervous people are, or
Yeah,
how nervous I would be if I come into a new team, if I haven't had years of working remotely, I might still feel like I'm missing something. And to have some of that contact away from that real time. So in a more when I'm a little bit more calm or stuff, I think that async video, async audio. Again, we're going back to technology is still, is still not catching up with human creativity. But anything that is not only the written text. So written text for the more formal stuff, but also what else can we give them that they can cherish and connect with in their own time and when they're in the mood that most suits them. I'm thinking that there's a huge change in mindset that we can look at there.
yeah. Never forget the human element, the relationship building element.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Okay. So we've got all that. But of course, remote, the word means, of course, working away from each other, but it has meant for a very long time also working away from headquarters.
Hmm.
So you prompted me when we were talking about what we are going to talk about in this conversation. You prompted me this whole conversation that I think is going to start opening up again now. I mean, it's been around for a while, and we were like, "Oh, should we call it virtual? Oh, that's no. Should we call it remote? Should we call it
Yeah.
distributed? Is it this? What is it?" But what are your issues then with the word remote? If issues is not too loaded a word.
No, I would say issues. So these so these days, who's remote?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the question. Because we're almost all of us, except for a few countries, are still working from home. We're still sequestered, so to speak. But as people start to move back into offices, there's going to be some that are still working remotely and some who are co-located. And that term remote, it just it seems to have a distinction of far away, not connected. And so it always seemed to have had a little bit of a negative connotation
Yeah.
for me. And I've never liked the term, even though I use it in article titles and everything else, because that's what people recognize now. That's what they search for. But it's the wrong way to think about it, especially for those who have decided this way of working will actually work for us. So if that's the case, what do you call it?
Yeah.
So,
And if you are using it, just because, as you say, because the word has stuck in
yeah,
the English language, which is better than the teletrabajo that is stuck in the Spanish one. But
yeah,
anyway, the I'm with some organizations that I've been working with, where it was not just about how do we work away from each other and how do we work from home, but also how do we integrate this into an organization where people also have a presence in the building. I think we also need to think about if you're in the building and you're talking to people who are in their home, you are as remote from them as they are from you.
hmm yeah,
Therefore, we've got to think about that remote is not just the person who is not in the building, is everyone who's connected at a distance and through technology from each other. And
yeah,
that could help us if we keep the word, but we change our use of it, maybe. I don't know.
maybe, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
I was also thinking with the hiring process and when we start to talk about the role and whether instead of saying this is a remote role, whether this is this is a role that does not have to be based in the office. Or if we don't have an office, this is a non-office based role. Or this is a role not based in our central office. Again, whether there's any wording around that can help right
Yes.
from the hiring process.
Untethered. Free
Untethered.
range.
Free range. Free range, free movement,
Free range worker.
I like location independent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
Location.
mouthful,
Yeah.
but a location independent role, and also for me, it really is location independent, which means it doesn't have to be from home, blah, 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 blah. So I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting maybe we can have a conversation at the beginning of 2022, Mark, and see how the language has changed or not around the world of this dispersed way of working.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just the language, it's how we treat each other. So if remote means you are at a disadvantage in your organization, that's the real problem. That's the real problem.
So that would be another, is that your next course? How to discover, interview, and hire amazing people, some of whom are in the office and some of whom are not.
Going for the world's longest course title? Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, Mark. Well, before we deteriorate into the spiral of giggliness, school.lucidmeetings.com. You can find the course there. And of course, markkilby.com. And just a reminder as well, we do have Mark has appeared in the show. I think you're probably the most returned guest ever. And you did come and talk with Johanna about From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams, which is a fabulous book, especially if you are working in Agile, but also actually for anyone, because I've always said this, the principles of Agile are amazingly suited to the online space. And if you embrace some of those, and I hope that listeners have heard how much you are, I mean, you still call yourself an Agile coach, don't you? Or not?
Agile coach, distributed Agile guide.
Yes.
Maybe I'll call myself a free range guy.
Free range
really
guide.
Liking it.
So but hearing you speak about the quick iteration of processes, the constant feedback loops, it is just embedded. It's just you have that in you, and that kind of thinking is where we thrive in the online space. So it's wonderful to speak to you, Mark.
It's always a joy.
Have a great day in Florida. We didn't tell our listeners where you were, but it's always interesting.
It's a little warm here today. I might go for a walk in the nice sunny weather here. So.
Excellent. Well, have a good one.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark Kilby, for returning to the show. And listeners, thank you so much for listening. As I mentioned a moment ago, if you are ready to continue thinking about the process of welcoming a new team member into your team and even into your organization, episode 219 is all about the integration process, which I prefer that word to onboarding also. And it features Mark, but it also features Mandy Garner from workingmoms.co.uk and also Marcus Vermuth from Buffer. So our next episode also features Nadia Vatalidis, who is the director of people at Remote, the company, and she will tell us all about how they onboard people. So I hope you're enjoying these. I hope we're keeping you company, either on your way to your tennis class or as you're walking your dog or even as you're doing your knitting. You all know who you are, listeners. So do get in touch and let us know that you're listening, because we love to hear from you. And indeed, if there's anything that you'd like to cover on the show, there might be a space for it. You never know. So I'm going to rattle off all the ways that you can get in touch. For a start, make sure that you are subscribed to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast in whatever podcast app you use. Some apps are changing the button to follow, so just make sure that we are there in your system. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter, which has reading and listening recommendations from the month, plus a digest of our own content. And you can sign up there over at virtualnotdistant.com. You can follow our page on LinkedIn. You can follow us on Twitter, Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O. Do connect with me on LinkedIn, but tell me you're listening so that I will accept your invitation. Or you can even email me, Pilar, Pilar, at virtualnotdistant.com. There are many shows covering the whole remote workspace, online collaboration space. So a big, huge thank you for staying with us. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy. We could go on forever. Yes, yes, but you have a day.
I think that's what I'm going to go. I'm start calling myself the free range coach.